Thanks. It's great to be here. I just got promoted to executive editor. I am an associate editor, just to correct the record. What we're going to talk about is why can't technology save politics? And I just want to spend a moment introducing everyone. I'm going to start with Eric Schmidt in the center. Longtime CEO of Google, now the executive chairman. If you look into his biography, in a sense, he was designed for the job at Google. He actually got his hands on real, work with software in his early years. He's written 2 books, The New Digital Age and How Google Works, and he promised that he would reveal some Google secrets this afternoon. I want to introduce Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, one of the most interesting people in politics. Everyone is talking about you in Washington. In the New Yorker profile that came out about 2 weeks ago, they said you, Senator Paul, are to Republicans in the year 2014 what Obama was to Democrats in 2006. That must hurt.
I like similes, though.
He's a physician, somebody, and the argument in the New Yorker, which was well informed, is that you are the most discussed senator. You are brilliant at fundraising. Apparently tonight, Larry Ellison is having a fundraiser for the Republican Senate Committee, and you're going to raise $750,000.
That's what I hear.
Not bad. You connect to people in a way. At the same time, lots of people disagree with you. Including John Doerr at the end. John Doerr is the venture capitalist of our era at Kleiner Perkins, invested early investments in Google, Amazon, Twitter. I saw on the list you serve on 15 boards, is that correct?
Advised.
5, okay, well they kicked you off 10. And this, just one of the numbers, the investment in Amazon, initial $7 million, is now worth $10 billion.
God bless America.
Not a bad record. As the adage applies, follow the money. And follow John Doerr. Okay, let's get to what we're going to try to talk about. And what we want to do is address the government side of politics. In other words, what can government do, utilize, leverage technology to improve a number of areas. And, we'll never get to them all, but big issues: education, healthcare, climate change, privacy issues, which, Senator, you've been very outspoken on, and the jobs issues. What is the impact of technology on jobs? So let me just throw it open to you, Senator, on what can technology do for education, and are we doing enough? Is there a ways to go?
Right. I grew up in schools that were bigger, and everybody said, let's make the classroom smaller. So we had like 30 kids to a teacher, and we got down to 15 kids for a teacher, and it turns out our scores are about the same. I think we should think outside the box. So I think instead of going to 15 to 1, we should go to 1 million to 1, or maybe 10 million to 1. And what I mean by that is the internet, or people have said the digital age, let's give everybody a smartphone and they'll be smart. I don't think that's necessarily going to work, but I think if you take the ability to transmit information and you find an extraordinary teacher that can explain calculus better than anybody in the world, somebody in Africa should be able to learn from that teacher. And because of the internet bringing the price per pupil down, I think extraordinary things could happen, but I think government's mostly gotten in the way. And when I'm out here, what fascinates me when I meet the smart people in Silicon Valley is that they've kind of given up on government, and they're probably right. Let's just go ahead and fix it ourselves.
Eric, what do you think?
I'm on the board of the Khan Academy. John's wife was the initial founding member. They've done a lot of research on this as an example to make the senator's point exactly right. If you change the way teaching occurs in a classroom and you change what they're doing, you gamify the lessons, you have people watch videos at home, they do problem sets under the supervision of a teacher, you get sustained benefits of education, especially people who are historically underserved, right? So we're beginning to see, because of internet teaching, real gains in education. And by the way, it's central to the future of America, because as jobs get automated away, the only thing we can do is have smarter people.
But are entrepreneurs going to do that, or is the government going to do it, or is there a partnership, John?
So on a number of these topics, Senator Paul and I may differ, but only in degree. I think you'll find we probably agree on more than people would think. And I talked to Saul Kahn coming up here today, and Saul would be the first to say that for his kid, or any kids, the thing he really wants is not technology. He wants a great teacher in the classroom. What Saul wants to do with Khan Academy is change what goes on in the classroom. So kids are learning offline, and then they're mentored in the classroom. And the teachers are liberated to do what they do best. My conclusion out of this is we need teachers, we need government in education, doing the right things, and we need technology. And you'll hear that as a recurring theme of mine. There are education entrepreneurs. We should back those education entrepreneurs. And they're not just tech entrepreneurs. They can start whole new schools, like charter public schools.
So the problem comes when government writes rules that protect incumbents against innovative change.
Absolutely.
And over again, if you look at the actual problem in government, we have a lot of government, there's a lot of money being spent, we have it for a reason, but it's decided that this is the way, and new ideas that come out of Silicon Valley aren't applicable, right? As if they don't exist. But I would argue that the entrepreneur who leads this needs a space to innovate. Right? We fought for 20 years to help create charter schools so we'd have some choices. Now we have a whole movement in education of a new way for teachers. Let's let them try it and see how the outcomes go.
So who's in charge, though? I mean, because don't the entrepreneurs feel, well, you know, the government, yeah, we'll try something and it's experimental.
But here, the good thing is no one's in charge of the internet, and look how good the internet's going. Look at all the things that spring up, because there is spontaneous order to the marketplace. And I think the same thing happens in education. And the thing about the extraordinary teacher model that I love about it is, think about it this way. Think of the football player who's the best at what he does and gets millions of dollars. Maybe we could have teachers. If the marketplace got into education, now Khan Academy is nonprofit, which is fine, but if you ultimately want this to be sustainable, let's put profit in it. I know a company, I can't remember the company's name right now, that does it for $7 a day, and they're trying to market lesson plans throughout Africa. So there's all kinds of great concepts to this, but think about it. If you've ever had an extraordinary teacher, the person who could explain calculus where anybody could understand calculus, and then maybe could apply calculus to the real world, you know, to what you would do if you had calculus, and what you could do with that knowledge. There are extraordinary people who could do it, but they could teach everybody in the world. You'd still have teachers in the classroom, but there are great explainers, and they would be all throughout education.
Here's what's changed that's really exciting, and as Eric and I'm sure you know well, for decades, innovators and entrepreneurs tried to push technology into classrooms, through districts, through administrations, and it was a struggle. It basically didn't have impact. And then, while no one was looking, while no one noticed, all of a sudden, all the kids walked into the classroom with all the technology they need, one of these smart devices. So the really savvy ed tech entrepreneurs are saying, I'm going to use the App Store, I'm going to download the curriculum or the quizzes or the way to message. A company like Remind has 30% of the U.S. school teachers messaging students and parents on a free service. This is a very exciting time to be an education entrepreneur.
Senator, let's fantasize for a moment. You're President of the United States. What would you look...
I like the supposition, so far. Go on.
Okay. A nightmare to some. What would you look for in an education secretary? Because were that to happen, and what you're all kind of saying, hey, look, we're at the 2-yard line here, and we can go much further. What would you look for?
You know, I think one catchword you hear, and everybody else say it, and what does it really mean, is innovation. But the thing is you got to not stifle innovation. Innovation, to me, for the most part, comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. So innovation is never coming out of Washington. And I think we should try to get everybody on the same side. And I think teachers are not too far away from this. Even though the teachers' unions somewhat stifle innovation at times, I think the teachers don't want to be judged on whether they're a good or a bad teacher by people in Washington. So I think decentralization is good, but free up. I don't know. I personally,
would you consider John Doerr to be your education
absolutely,
secretary?
Absolutely. I haven't heard anything I've disagreed with so far. I'm sorry, we're supposed to be on the wrong side if this is a debate. But the thing is that what I would say is that when you free it up, I don't know the perfect model. Khan is a great one. But there may be somebody better than Khan, better than Khan Academy. But the only way you know it is if you have the freedom for someone to develop new ways.
The internet allows for 1,000 experiments, and we can actually measure stuff now as long as people don't prevent those experiments from occurring. And one of the rules about the internet is everything is being tried. That's why it's such an extraordinary platform.
But there is that sense of, the times we live in where, entrepreneurs can go out and do things and try things and so forth, but it's not moving fast enough, is it? I mean, isn't it going to be, it's too slow.
But we've been depending on government.
And you've got to have an energizer, a force that says, no, we are going to do this.
We've got to move faster. 5 years ago, there was no Khan Academy. Now there's 10 million unique visitors a month. 2 years ago, there was no Remind messaging network, and now they've got 30% of the U.S. school teachers, over 1 million, messaging the students, messaging the parents, and homework completion rates go up 40%, class knowledge retention goes up. All the data shows the answer is outstanding teachers involve parents.
So governments are very, very change resistant. Largely, I think, because the laws are written, as I said, by the incumbents and by the employees themselves and the special interests and so forth. And so you have to, as an attitude, say, I've got to create a competitive choice. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to the American model, what is America about? It's about having choices and letting consumers decide. And indeed, this huge success in tech is really now being driven by consumers having choices.
Does President Obama agree with this, Eric?
I would never try to channel the president.
Okay.
But I'll give you an example from sort of a medical background of things that we need to think about. There's something in ophthalmology. If I patch your eye when you're a baby and don't take the patch off till you're 7, you won't have any vision. Not because there's anything wrong with your eye, because your brain didn't develop. So the first 7 years of life are incredibly important. Your brain is really plastic at that point. We should be teaching languages starting at 3 and 4 and 5 years old. But you know what? When I was a kid, you didn't start till like 8th grade learning Spanish or something. And by then, it's almost too late. You really need to be teaching this. But allow that innovation means that local people, and I grew up in Texas, we should have been learning, Spanish at a much earlier age. But the problem with innovation is that there are rules saying, no, this starts in 7th grade, and it always has, and it always will.
In healthcare, and again, you're a doctor, the innovation is about to explode because of patient-centered monitoring and devices. Basically, these smartphones can now, basically with transdermal patches and so forth, really revolutionize the way doctors deal with their patients. So why does it occur there? It's because that area is largely unregulated.
But suppose if Google had been in charge of the Obamacare website, would we have had the troubles that we had?
So one of the Google...
You're not answering the question.
You didn't let me answer. One of the Google employees took a leave of absence to, in fact, fix the Obamacare website. And he describes, and I think it's fair to say, that government procurement is exactly pessimal for how software is built. Multiple contractors, no clear outcomes, unclear regulations.
No one in charge.
No one in charge, no way to test things, hard dates. We learned decades ago that produces very bad software. So the answer is that our industry, the one that we represent now, does software differently. And the government has been unable to change the way it does software into the new model.
But you have to realize it's also inherent to anything government does, because if you don't have the profit motive in it, you don't have a feedback loop to know whether you're doing a good job, government can do the wrong thing for 2 decades. We've been doing some of the wrong things in education for 5 decades. There's no feedback loop because people have to go to school. So, there's the coercive aspect to that, so there's no feedback loop.
So the feedback loop is markets. in markets that work. And in education...
You sound like a Republican, John.
I came to Silicon Valley as a Republican. I just identified more closely with the progressive social norms and the kind of conservative economic norms. But I want to go to markets. Let me just go back to markets. In education, charter public schools allowed there to be a market of choice for the parents of the kids who were underserved. So I could send my kid someplace other than the crummy public school where that kid was going to get killed. Have their future irrevocably diminished. I think in healthcare, this is a perfect example of the largest segment of the American economy that's the most screwed up. The patients, the providers, and the payers are not linked in any rational economic system. You don't know what a procedure costs. We reimburse physicians based on volume, not value. And and people don't really have choice if they don't know what things cost. That, I believe, is changing. And that is changing in part because of what Obamacare has allowed in flexibility of how the system is paid, how people are reimbursed. I think the action in healthcare reform is not around the smart devices that you hold in your hand. It's going after the oceans of money. $3 trillion we spend in this country on healthcare every year. If the U.S. healthcare system was a country, it'd be the 5th largest country in the world. It'd be bigger than France. Only the United States, Germany, Japan, and China would be bigger countries. So that's where we need to go. We need to go, and everyone agrees that about 1/3 of that funding is wasted. How do you get there? You make markets. You make markets. So you say, I'm going to separate out as a bundle, which is not a new idea in healthcare, but it's possible now under Obamacare. You separate out a bundle of services and say, I'm going to bid those out to the market. Tesla is putting together a bundle of pregnancy benefits for successful live births to kids. And then they're going to let the healthcare system in the Bay Area bid to deliver those. If they deliver those at lower cost with better outcomes, they get to keep the profit, to Senator Paul's profit motive.
And so you would agree?
Well, I agreed until we got to the conclusion that Obamacare was going to work and do this. But
it is working.
Well, here's what I would say is, John's exactly right that the problem in healthcare in the old system, but still in the new system, is that the consumer is not connected to the product.
Yep.
When the consumer pays for the product and is aware of it, prices come down like any other marketplace. So for example, I go in and have a heart attack and my mouthwash is $45. I don't care if my deductible is $10. I've been disconnected from it. I don't care. I'm not going to take the time to complain about it. As an eye surgeon, there were 2 things I did, though, that was a real marketplace: LASIK surgery and contact lenses. But there's no intermediary.
Right.
With Obamacare, we're creating an artificial, we're trying to get to where there is more connection to consumer and product. The problem is we do it artificially and with a coercive model that says you have to buy this type of insurance. If you did it with freedom and you were connecting people to the exchanges and they could buy anything they want, that's a marketplace and would work. Because here's the problem. If I'm poor and you give me a $6,000 deductible and then you tell me it has to cut, the reason it's expensive is you told me 15 different things that I'm coerced into having in the insurance. If you had a true $6,000 deductible, it would be very, very cheap. But right now, the Obamacare exchanges have given us $6,000 deductibles that still cover a bunch of stuff and still are extraordinarily expensive.
Okay, now Eric and John have spent lots of time in Washington, D.C. with Obama, with Democrats and so forth. What is it that D.C., Washington, the Washington political system, does not understand about Silicon Valley?
I think
there's clearly, there's a disconnect here.
Well, I think it's a misunderstanding or a difficulty in understanding marketplaces, and that the answers come from a central authority. They almost never do. The thing that brought down the Soviet Union was they couldn't determine the price of bread. And that sounds flippant, but it's true. A Politburo, a central authority, can never determine the price of something. Only a complicated marketplace with 300 million people bidding and going back and forth can determine a real price. There is not a moral price, there's not an immoral price. There is only a market price. And it's determined in a complicated fashion through this churning of the whole marketplace. If in government we set things, or if we dictate what you buy in insurance or the prices, inevitably we'll be wrong on the top side or the low side and will cause misallocation of resources. I think that thinking that there is an answer in government is the first mistake.
What is the disconnect, Eric, as you see it?
I think what the senator said is to some degree true. I think there's another problem, which is a lack of focus on efficiency.
On what?
On efficiency.
Yeah.
The government wastes an enormous amount of money in all sorts of ways. And they don't pass the sort of reasonable test when you look at them. And so one of the best principles is to say, why don't we start all of our conversation with some facts, right? And that conversation never actually happens in Washington. So if you look at all of the studies of government effectiveness and so forth, and these are bipartisan studies, they never get implemented. And they never get implemented, I think, maybe because of earmarks, maybe because of specialization.
What's the problem, though, with the people who work in government? What are their incentives?
Well, there's a misalignment of incentives as well. So imagine a CEO will stand up and say, you know, I made a mistake. Now, political leaders, government leaders have no incentive to do that because it's then used against them in the next election or in their review. And furthermore, the reason there's no innovation in government to first order is there's no bonuses for innovation. In fact, if you take a risk, the scenario of goodness is fine, but if you take a risk and it fails, your career is over. Right? So until we can understand that we want to empower our government leaders to actually do stuff in some sort of measurable way, which is not how our system works.
So here's the solution. Make the federal government a big, giant venture capitalist firm and turn it over to John, and he can create the proper incentives. You do that.
Well, I think it's partially that is the answer. But what that means is that not that we really turn over government, that we minimize what government does. Government has to, we have certain things we have government do. And even as much as I'm for the private market taking over and helping us with education, I'm not against government schools and the public being involved. But what I would say is let's minimize it. Let's don't get government involved in laying cable or doing search engines. Let's keep the government out of stuff that the marketplace can do. Try to do things they are stuck with doing, even then acknowledging they won't do it very well. The military has billions of dollars worth of waste. They've never been audited. I have a bill that's called Audit the Pentagon. You would think we would pass that tomorrow, and yet it's never passed.
So if I can take a swing at that question, what I would like to see is more entrepreneurs everywhere. I'm just in awe of entrepreneurs. We got a lot of tech entrepreneurs, need more. But when you go look for policy entrepreneurs or government entrepreneurs, there's, as Eric says, very few risk takers. My definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who does more than anyone thinks possible with less than anyone thinks possible. It's very simple. More with less. And I imagine Senator Paul's definition of government would be government does less than anyone thinks possible with more than anyone thinks possible.
You really are a Republican, aren't you?
But there are places in the government, let me take DARPA, for example, or ARPA-E, or places where we're doing research in not just bloated budgets, but really effective change that I think ought to be admired and ought to be copied, ought to be propagated. Eric's right. You can't, when you're in government, when you're in politics, when you're in Washington, D.C., you can be sure there's somebody out there who's trying to kill you every day. They're trying to eliminate your job, to eliminate what it is you're trying to do. And that's a very different world than startups.
But Senator, there's something going on in the country. Listen to two devoted Democrats who spend time raising money and advising and so forth.
I thought they were on the fence. I thought I was here to try to convince them to come to the good side. No, they're not on the fence?
Okay, yeah, but they are expressing a critique of government and an unease about the way government handles lots of these things.
Well, I don't think we're that far apart, to tell you the truth, and you'd have to ask them. But they may not want a party label necessarily to their ideas. And sometimes when we can be beyond the party labels, I think that helps. But I would say, like with what John said earlier, he counts himself as probably a fiscal conservative who believes in capitalism. He's been successful because of that system, but he just doesn't feel comfortable because of some of the social issues. And that's why I've been saying all along, if we want to try to get someone like John, we've got to say, you know what, we're going to be a party more open to people with a variety of opinions on the social issues.
Again, Silicon Valley has historically been socially liberal and fiscally conservative, and this is why politicians have never quite been able to figure out why we end up in the situation we do. But virtually everybody that we know, and I suspect people in this room, fundamentally believe that the private sector is the one that's going to create the jobs. And I would say the simplest solution to most of America's problems is create more entrepreneurs and do everything you can to get them to be more successful to invent the future. Now, what does that mean? I'll give you the list. Stronger education, more models of entrepreneur, allow immigration in the country, don't take smart people and kick them out. All right, I can go on.
You're already in trouble. Senator, one of the things you've said about the Republican Party, it's fascinating. He said it must evolve, adapt, or die. Maybe we should take a vote about what people would pick on that list.
Easy
But what do you mean there? I mean, that's...
Well, the other thing I've said is that you remember when Domino's admitted that their pizza crust sucked? The Republican Party needs to admit that their brand isn't so good, and they have to try to do better at presenting the message. A lot of our policy decisions, I think we could get many people to agree on, but we have to present our message better. There are two aspects to politics. One is your attitude, and the other is a policy. We have had an attitude where we don't appear to be welcoming to African Americans or Hispanics or Asian Americans. We haven't been a welcoming enough party, and I know that sounds touchy-feely, but it's true. We need to reach out more. Go ahead.
So, Senator, do you think that if the Republicans end up with the Senate, and many people think that's possible, that the political dynamic will change in the next couple of years?
You know, I think, in fact, in some ways, maybe I think for the better. For example, immigration reform, H-1Bs, the STEM visas, the visas for people with advanced degrees.
The stupidest policy in all of America. Educate them, kick them out, put them in other countries, and allow them to compete against us.
Tell this to President Obama?
Yes.
You do. What does he say?
Everyone just sort of sighs. The senator is a strong...
But here's my prediction is, Republicans take over, Democrats never could do it, we will pass it in the first 3 months.
Can you imagine if we actually did that? We'd actually have immigration reform? Oh my God. Wake me up.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this for 20 years.
We don't want to go down this road, but why is, I mean, they talk about government in gridlock. It's not it's just not functioning. It is not doing its job. Why?
The reason why, the fundamental reason why, is that congressional districts are not competitive. We let the politicians draw the boundaries around the House districts, and there are out of 435 House seats, maybe 40 that are competitive. And when all these seats are then wired for parties, they tend to move to the extremes. If I could change any single thing, it wouldn't be campaign finance reform. It would be to not let the people we're electing draw the lines that determine whether or not they're elected.
I think there's a clear congressional mandate here.
And this is a problem in the House. It's not a problem in the Senate.
And by the way, if you just require that they be designed as parallelograms, it'd be fine.
They can make triangles. I don't.
Yeah,
I think you could actually have a computer algorithm do this.
That's the problem, Senator?
I would have a computer algorithm draw them to the best you can to keep counties and cities intact, and I would do it beyond the legislature. But then the other thing I would add to that would be term limits. You do that with term limits, and you'll fix a lot of our problems.
Well, as you know, Senator, in California, we've actually changed it and we're actually not running this sort of national experiment as to whether we end up producing House seats that are more, quote, moderate. There's a series of people who've done analysis of these, and a recent startup has done a thorough analysis. And indeed, the politicization of the smaller districts has driven a huge wedge on both sides, by the way. So John's right.
But that's too glib and simple, isn't it? The gerrymander.
We're engineers, Bob. These are the facts.
Living in it, trying to report
Someone
on it.
designed the system that produced the bias.
But
they're
human
victims
beings
of their own system.
Can sometimes power over a system. And I think, from spending too many decades looking at this, that there's a leadership problem in the White House and in the Congress. And I chart how much time they spend together, and they do not spend enough time. I mean, if you ask the audience, how many people, and I'll ask them, how many people have been involved in a negotiation at one time or another in your life? Raise your hands. How many are married? It's the same question, right? And what you learn is the person on the other side of the table or the bed is your best friend. That's the person who can give you what you want. You can give them what you want. You don't reach a compromise in an hour or 2 hours. You have to spend all night, all weekend. They are not spending the time to listen. You know, in my business, the big goal is listen, and people are not listening.
Before we break, let's talk about climate. Can we do that?
You've got
Technology,
6 seconds.
policy? No, you should ask
Go
the
ahead.
questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Because it's a vital issue, and the senator would not agree with you on some of this.
So my view is the science is really clear, and that the effect of greenhouse gases is anthropomorphic, and it's the challenge of our generation. And it's actually not all that hard to solve. If we invest more in innovation, in R&D, and by the way, Americans spend more on potato chips than we do on clean energy R&D, and we use some market forces like a revenue-neutral carbon tax, the United States can go from being an embarrassment on the world stage to a leader that will empower other nations to deal with global extreme weather, global
What do you
weirding.
think, Senator?
The way to make sure that the environment is always protected is to make it profitable. Profitability makes sustainability. And so what I would say is there are many aspects. We talk about a lot of the bad things, and I don't disagree. There are bad things that we should try to do better. But one of the good things we do in our society is we recycle things for a profit, lots of different things. Aluminum, paper, you name it. We're doing some good things. But the reason it goes on, and there might be a tax incentive in the beginning to get something started, but you got to make it profitable, and then it goes on and on forever. And there have to be some rules, but all I would say when you're talking about rules on emissions or carbon or any of these things is the president's fond of saying it should be balanced. It has to be balanced, and you have to balance the equation that there are jobs in the balance and the economy in the balance. And you have to acknowledge that the rules we've had on emissions, even from coal-fired plants, have made emissions less each decade for 45 years, and that's from the EPA.
But Senator, would you agree that the science is clear, that global warming is a really serious problem and it's caused by human activity?
Yeah, I think there is a component of human activity definitely to it. The only thing I would argue on the other side is that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So we're talking about small segments of data, and that when people get carried away and say, oh, we had 4 hurricanes last year, the end of the world's coming in 100 years, that's alarmist and just frankly not very factually oriented.
There are actually people who are trying to figure out which climate events are correlated with climate change and which are not. And as a rough number, roughly half of them seem to be directly a result of human emissions of one kind, and roughly half don't. So, for example, all of us are subject to this horrific drought here, but there's evidence that there's a normal drought cycle, right? People are debating this. So that doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening.
I agree.
Right? And indeed, climate change is very real.
I agree.
But more needs to be done. If you remember years ago, the Washington Post and Google, we talked about having a partnership and looking at climate change and trying to really, in a neutral way, publish articles and a book or whatever is necessary to say this is what's going on. There are significant differences about how you read the data, which is your point.
Actually, all of this stuff has been settled fairly clearly. We know it's largely human caused. There are many debates as to what now happens. The good news, and this is important, is that over the next 40 years, we rebuild our energy infrastructure anyway. So if we rebuild it in the right way, we can help solve this problem for 1,000 years. And we were going to rebuild the energy infrastructure anyway. That helps create jobs. America is now a net energy exporter and will soon be exporting more oil than Saudi Arabia. So America has a strong energy sector, and we have a chance to shape this along the forces that the Senator was talking about.
We're going to spend some time on audience questions. Where are the microphones? If you have a question, if you would stand up, please. We only are going to have a few minutes. I'm sorry. Think of all the things we didn't get to. Who's got, sir,
Hi,
here.
my name is Gettleman, and as an outsider, I'm just curious that your country only has 2 political parties, and I'm wondering if there's some technological cure to that at some point in the future, whether social media, or do you see more people getting a voice and more parties involved in your government?
I would say a plurality of people are no longer Republican or Democrat and aren't comfortable in either party. We have many legal impediments. It's hard to get on the ballot for a third party, And the debates, once upon a time, the presidential debates were League of Women Voters, and they were independent. They let Pro in the debate, and lo and behold, he got 17% of the vote and scared the Republicans and Democrats to death, and they said, never again. So the presidential debates are actually controlled by a commission, controlled by the Republican and Democrat Party. So there are a lot of impediments to a third party, but I would say there's a lot of dissatisfaction and people that don't neatly fit in either party.
How about an internet party?
Sir,
you can over here.
You can do almost anything on your cell phone, banking, transferring money. Why can't we vote on a cell phone?
Good
I don't want
question.
to answer everyone. Do you guys want to tackle that?
I think, Senator, that's the best one for you.
I'm a big believer in having more people vote. So I spent the last year trying to restore voting rights for people who have had it taken away from a youthful violation. I'm a little concerned about making sure that the people only vote once. And, you know, I've been on polls before where people smarter than me can put things into polls and change polls. So you have to be careful about it. I think there ought to also be a little bit of effort. I don't care if we have long, early voting and making it easy for people to get to polls, but a little bit of effort, get off your couch and actually go into someplace to vote.
I mean, just think if you could do that, and then the Putin's cyber warriors would get into the U.S. voting system and turn elections
You mean they're
around
not
and
already?
create all kinds. I mean, you only, I think, reach that point where there is real confidence in the security of your smartphone. And anyone feel secure about what's their smartphone?
We certainly do. We use encryption.
That's a great. I'm proud of
There's
Google.
a reason why encryption works.
I'm proud of Google and Apple for stepping up to the government and saying we're going to develop our systems where the government will have to come to us with a warrant with someone's name on it. And I
Thank you,
thank you
Senator.
for that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks very much.
Okay, over here, sir.
Hi. The discussion got me thinking, I know it was a long time ago, but it got me thinking of rural electrification and the highways created by the government. And I know Senator Paul said that the government shouldn't be in the business of laying pipe, but my question is, do you believe, all of you, that there's any place for the government to create infrastructure that can further business in the future?
I definitely believe that, and I think America badly needs increased investment in infrastructure. That doesn't mean the government has to fund it. The government could help create banks that are funded by private enterprises, return on profit, but we're lagging far behind our competitors. One more thought. I think the best infrastructure we could possibly create would be to clear out the regulatory delays and the underbrush so we could get fiber to as many American homes as would be economically possible. I recommend that, Senator, to your platform.
John and I are wildly in agreement in this. The quicker we can get the local rules to allow real competition in all these spaces, the market forces are very strong. There's lots of money to be made here, and the private sector can take over.
What's the experience with Google Fiber?
It just takes a while. That's why we had to actually have cities bid, because we needed the cities to really want it. Senator?
One thing I would add to that is there's $2 trillion worth of American profit overseas. I've introduced legislation that would lower the tax rate to let people bring that home, and then the taxes on that money I would put directly into the infrastructure fund to build roads and bridges with.
And Eric agrees with you on that.
I personally think it's a fascinating idea.
Too much agreement here today. Go ahead.
Hi, so I'm Sarah, and I'm a sophomore at Stanford. And I recently became very fascinated by the concept of social impact bonds, the pay-per-performance contracts, because I think it seems like a really viable way to connect government individuals with innovators and also investors. So I was just wondering if you thought this might be a viable solution, or if any other solutions might exist, say as, I don't know, like a teacher startup competition or something along those lines.
Anyone?
These are privately issued bonds for social reasons?
Yeah, so they're a pay-per-performance contract where basically the government partners with a private organization. And one example was in New York City, where I'm from, there's Rikers Island, and basically there was increasing examples of the individuals would be released, but then would come back into jail, and this was very expensive for taxpayers. So then what the Social Impact US organization came in and did was they connected Rikers Island with individuals and nonprofits who can help the prisoners stay out of jail. And then Goldman Sachs investors invested and then received returns based on the reduction in recidivism rates. So it was seemed like a really cool idea.
It's a way of getting more accountability into that part of the system. And I think all forms of accountability and transparency are improvements.
And the only thing I'd
Sure.
add to that is that anytime you can put a market force or an incentive into government, you'll make government better. So I have a bill that would give bonuses to government employees if they find savings in their department. At the end of the year, usually, as the end of the year's coming, if you have $1 million left, you're like, hey guys, let's go to Las Vegas and have a convention.
So why doesn't this bill pass, Senator?
I never got a vote on it. I need to get.
No, I'm serious.
I do have a Democrat co-sponsor, and so if you had a $12 million budget and you'll save the taxpayer $1 million, I'd give you a percentage of it.
Why doesn't this pass?
You help me and we'll get it done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I tell you, we have 40 seconds, so we're. Thank you all very much. I remember the Robin Williams movie, The Dead Poets Society, about a subversive teacher. And at one point, Robin Williams stands up on his desk in class. And it's an amazing moment. And he says, I stand on my desk to remind myself that we need to find a new way to think about things. And we've been treated today by 3 subversives in their own way who are themselves thinking about new ways to do things, and I think get us to do the same. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you all.